I am about to go down a rabbit hole that is so confusing to students that I am actually afraid to address this issue. It is truly the elephant in the room. I am going to call this video the complete story of thirds, and it is my hope that I will get maximum feedback about whether or not you guys understand what I am presenting. The overall idea is that there are all kinds of thirds, and some of them get very confusing even to me when I try to name them myself. But two of them are so basic that they are taught all over the world with traditional terms. So let's start first with those and see how they work. The basic idea is this. We have major and minor thirds, and those are the thirds that we see something like 90% of the time. The immediate problem is trying to figure out what the words major and minor mean, because traditional theory has one meaning for intervals and another meaning for chords. When we are talking about major and minor chords, we are talking about a basic quality that we hear, and those two qualities are very clear. For the rest of your life, you will know that major and minor chords have very clear sounds. Almost everyone is going to hear major chords as optimistic, joyful, happy, relaxing, and other things of that nature. Almost everyone is going to hear minor chords as more sad, more serious, more heavy, or perhaps darker. But when we talk about major and minor intervals, we are no longer talking about a kind of sound, but rather about the size of how different intervals feel in our hands and how they look on the piano. A minor third is the size of a fat tone, and a major third is the size of a bitone. Major and minor for intervals is simply about bigger and smaller. Now for the first picture. You can see that I am showing a minor third first and then a major third. Those two intervals, by the way, combine to make a fifth. The result is a minor chord, and it is good to remember that the minor third is on the bottom and the major third is on the top. This is basic, and you want to understand this. In the next picture, things are reversed. This time, the major third is on the bottom and the minor third is on the top. The reversal of these two thirds suddenly makes us hear a major chord instead of a minor chord. No amount of logic explains to me why this is so. For me, it remains a mystery. In the third picture, we have the same thing as in the first picture, but this time I am using my own interval names. A fat tone on the bottom and a bitone on the top makes a major chord. In the fourth picture, again, I use my own interval names. A bitone on the bottom and a fat tone on the top makes a major chord. For me personally, this description is much clearer because it stops using the word major and minor for two completely different purposes. But I would really like to know who agrees with me and who does not, because possibly people with a lot of traditional experience will balk at these new terms, and yet they may not, and this is what I want to know. In the fifth picture, perhaps you can see how this whole subject becomes much more complicated when we change the look of intervals. In the example marked with Mozart's name, you see how he would write something like this with a fat tone on the top when it is clearly not any kind of a third. The fact that this is an augmented second is just pouring salt on the wound. Suddenly, this is getting very complicated, and yet the top interval is still a fat tone. Many later composers would write it a simpler way, and this is a solution I would choose myself. But we need to know that Mozart's notation is 100% correct. Any confusion comes from the terms and not from the notation. In my next picture, I think we get to the elephant. We have an incomplete diminished chord that is clearly two minor thirds, and I see them as two fat tones. They are written that way because of where the chord is going when it resolves to a G-flat major chord. But in the second example, we have that same incomplete diminished chord resolving to a G minor chord. And this time there is very clearly a fat tone on top that is not a minor third. So when I look at that chord, which has two fat tones resolving to a minor chord, I think any reasonable, open-minded human being will see that my explanation is simpler and more elegant. That leaves us with one final problem to solve. In this final picture, we start off with an augmented chord. There are two major thirds stacked, so using that description may be fairly clear to some of you. That chord then resolves to an inversion of an E minor chord. So far so good. But suddenly that same augmented chord is written with a diminished fourth on the top. And if that is not becoming Escher madness, I don't know what is. Something that could be fairly simple suddenly becomes confusing, and yet it is the same blasted chord. If, on the other hand, we simply label that augmented chord as two stacked bitones moving to another chord, then the whole matter becomes clear and again elegant. I like to make these instructional videos well under 5 minutes long, but this time I was not able to do it because the subject is so incredibly confusing and I could not make an explanation shorter. But once again, I am extremely interested in reactions from those of you who watched this video. I want to know who is understanding this and who is lost. Now, please subscribe to my channel and let me know what I'm doing right, what I could improve, or even what you think I am doing wrong. I welcome any feedback. So leave comments, please.